Herzlich willkommen zur letzten Veranstaltung dieses Tages im Rahmen des Programms The Years of Change. Ich freue mich sehr, einen der berühmtesten Autoren Israels, David Grossman, und einen der bekanntesten Literaturkritiker hierzulande, Lothar Müller, begrüßen zu dürfen. Ebenso herzlich möchte ich Johanna Polley willkommen heißen, die für uns aus dem Roman Was Nina wusste vorlesen wird. Vielen Dank, dass Sie unserer Einladung gefolgt sind. Mr. Grossman, we are very honored to welcome you today here. Bevor ich das Wort an Lothar Müller übergebe, möchte ich ihn und Johanna Polley ganz kurz vorstellen. Lothar Müller ist mehrfach ausgezeichneter Journalist, Literaturkritiker und Literaturwissenschaftler. Nach seinem Studium der Geschichte und Germanistik und nach der Promotion über den Schriftsteller Karl Philipp Moritz war er zunächst freiberuflicher Journalist für Zeitungen und Radio tätig. Er war danach als Feuilletonredakteur bei der Frankfurter Allgemeinen Zeitung und für die Süddeutsche Zeitung tätig und schreibt jetzt auch als Autor regelmäßig. Seit 2010 ist er Honorarprofessor an der Humboldt-Universität Berlin und Vorsitzender der Jury des Bremer Literaturpreises. Sein Buch Weiße Magie, die Epoche des Papiers, war in der Sparte Sachbuch für den Preis der Leipziger Buchmesse nominiert. In diesem Jahr oder gerade erschienen ist sein neues Buch Adrien Proust und sein Sohn Marcel, Beobachter der erkrankten Welt im Wagenbach Verlag. Johanna Polley ist Schauspielerin. Sie studierte Schauspiel an der Filmuniversität Babelsberg Konrad Wolf in Potsdam. 2016 spielte sie die Hauptrolle im Film Es war einmal Indianerland und übernahm danach unterschiedliche Rollen für Kino und Fernsehen, zuletzt im Tatort Was wir erben. Ich möchte Sie, liebes Publikum, noch auf den morgigen Tag sehr gerne hinweisen. Das Programm The Years of Change läuft noch weiter mit spannenden Gästen. Weitere Informationen bekommen Sie auf den Webseiten der Veranstalterinnen Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung www.bpb.de und www.literaturhaus-leipzig.de. Ich wünsche allen einen schönen und inspirierenden Abend und übergebe gerne das Wort an Lothar Müller. Vielen Dank.
Ja, vielen Dank Ihnen, Katharina Stetowicz, für die freundliche Einladung. Herzlich willkommen zu unserer Veranstaltung, Ihnen allen, von wo auch immer Sie uns zuschauen. Herzlich willkommen, aber natürlich vor allem David Grossman, der in seinem Haus am Rande von Jerusalem sitzt, in einem Zimmer vor dem Bild, das er sehr schätzt. Das ist ein Bild, das zeigt eine Landschaft um Galiläa, die ihm ans Herz gewachsen ist. Und wir werden heute vor allem über seinen Roman sprechen, Was Nina wusste. Ich halte den mal so hin, dass man ihn auch sehen kann. Sein neues Buch, das ist im vergangenen Sommer hier in Deutschland auf Deutsch erschienen. Und es ist der Nachfolger des Romans vom Jahr 2016. Auch den habe ich Ihnen noch mal kurz mitgebracht. Der heißt Kommt ein Pferd in die Bar. Da sehen Sie einen dunklen, schwarzen Mann. Das ist aber eine sehr witzige Figur, ein Stand-up-Comedian, der Israel in den Spiegel schauen lässt, indem er seine eigene Lebensgeschichte erzählt. David Grossman, very, very warm welcome to you. I just mentioned your last novel, A Horse Walks into a Bar. In Germany, we had this in 2016. And this was a book on Israel, nowadays Israel. This person was a stand-up comedian, and he told his life on stage in a certain way and made funny jokes, and with a funny novel and uncanny at the same time. When he told his story, he told something about the society he lived in. And this was very close to present state of Israel, and it was located in a small town at the seaside. And now this new novel, Was Nina wusste, is the German title, what Nina knew. In the English title is Life Plays With Me, is another title. And now this is a book on a very, very other, different subject. And my first question is, there is a real person behind this book, a real biography, and you mention the person in the postscript of the novel. And my first question is, how did you get in contact with this person?
First of all, good evening, Lothar. I'm glad to see you again, even from such a distance. Yes, you are right. There is a human being, a real person behind this story. Her name is Eva here. She was born in Croatia. She came to Israel in the 60s after she went through terrible experiences under the regime of Tito in Yugoslavia. One day she called me and she wanted to discuss something I wrote in the newspaper. She had some critical remarks and we started to talk, and she had a very special accent, a mixture of Serbo-Croatian, Hebrew, and Hungarian. Not very often you meet such an accent in Israel. And I became curious, and I started to ask her about herself and about her life. And she would tell me, but in a very calculated way. Whenever she got to a really significant point, she stopped and she said, well, maybe we should continue sometime later, like Scheherazade. And I liked this game, and I said, okay, why not? She used to call the next week or the next month and continue to tell me her story. And step by step, I realized that it's a very unusual story. It's probably the most extreme story I heard ever from a person. And you know, people come and give writers stories. They have a feeling that if a writer writes this story, it will be eternalized, which is not so sure, by the way. I told her, what would you do? What would you want to do with this, with your story? And she said, I want you to write it. And I said, but you are aware of the fact that I am not a documentarist. I will not write you exactly as you are, and I will not write exactly what happened to you. I will write you, but through my eyes, through my DNA fiction writing. She immediately agreed, and she said, you have, licentia poetica, you have the freedom of a poet, and whatever you do is fine. And then I really started to write down her stories, and also the language that she used, which is very special, as I mentioned, but not only a mixture of languages and accents. She had a very poetic, broken Hebrew. It's hard even to quote and to explain. And when the book came out in Israel, I even chose one of her sentences, life plays with me, but in Hebrew it's even more broken than what I quote here. Because I felt, my generation, we are the first generation to be born in Israel and to be born to the Israeli Hebrew. And we were always embarrassed, to say ashamed, that our parents who spoke broken Hebrew of refugees, who escaped the huge catastrophe. Their Hebrew was also a mixture of all kind of fragments of foreign languages. We were ashamed of them, and when our friends came to our home, we preferred to buffer between them and our parents, so they will not know how funny our parents are talking. And now I felt that I gave this slang, this accent of the broken Jews, of the refugee Jews, of the people who came from the Shoah to Israel, that I gave it a kind of a place and a present in modern Hebrew literature and modern Hebrew language. And I even put it on the cover of the book. As I said, it is made of such a broken sentence.
Oh, this is an interesting story. Basically, the history of Israel is a history of immigration. And in earlier novels of yours, we have these sons or daughters or grandsons or granddaughters of survivors of the Holocaust or of the dead of the Holocaust coming from Europe to Israel. And in this book, we have an East European biography. The person you mentioned grew up in Croatia, and she was part of the resistance in her country against Hitler. And then she was in a prison in Tito, Yugoslavia, and this is a very East European story. And you mentioned this broken Ivrit, this, one could say it's a trace of her history, her biography. And I would be curious to learn, how long did you know her? Because what I know is she died when she was older than 90 years. And she was, yes, this is very, very old. So that means she was born at the end of the First World War. She's the first generation born after the First World War. This is a large perspective for someone like you and me. We are both born in 1954, which is much later. So you knew a person from nearly 2 generations ahead. And how long did you know her?
I knew her for 20 years.
I see.
We were really close friends, and I still miss her. She died when she was 97. She was healthy almost until the last days.
I see. So we could start to
1918, so in the end of the First World War. She witnessed all the big things that happened in Europe, in the world. And I always asked her about her opinions about things, because I thought, so much experience that accumulated in her. And she was a very sober human being. And actually, in her last years, she felt so disappointed by life and by human beings, by the nature of people and the evil of people. And yet, at the same time, the energies that she had were so positive and so optimistic and so much of creating things and changing things. It was really hard to believe that she's 97.
Now, you had to transform this person into the character of your novel. The first step of transformation is finding a new name. In reality, she was Eva. You choose Vera. And had you any idea in choosing Vera, or is it just because Vera has something to do with the Latin origin of the word, perhaps, which is close to verum?
No, it was important for me that her name is very significant. Eva is beautiful because she is the mother of humanity. And in this case, let's say, if we think of what happened to her and to her daughter, there's something almost horribly ironic that she was called Eva. Maybe we should explain later this remark. But I looked for a name that will sound Eva and will have another meaning that is relevant to Eva, to my Eva, to Eva punished evil. Then I thought of Vera. Vera, as you said, truth. If a person has the name truth, well, inevitably he or she becomes a bit stiff. To be called truth is as if you put a huge note in front of you and you say, I am truthful, I know everything. And frankly enough, she had this element in her character. She was a mixture of a very, I can say, fanatic human being when it came to values, to what to do and what not to do, to politics. And at the same time, when it came to be with human beings, with friends, family members, he was the sweetest person on earth. And I was fascinated by this combination. And I tried to recreate it in the book, to find the way that a person can be so even rigid and principled in his values or her values, and at the same time soft and humane and understanding.
I think I can understand this. It's an ironic move in a certain sense, because transforming a real person into the character of a novel means putting this person into a sphere where lies are allowed. The novel is a form in which a lie is allowed, and you have, in a certain sense, to be able to lie in order to be a creator of characters, a storyteller in a novel. So it's a nice name for the prominent main character in your novel. And I would propose that we now start with the reading of the very beginning of the novel. And of course we will listen to the German version of your novel, and I have to introduce the translator. Dieser Roman, meine Damen und Herren, ist wie schon der vorangegangene, kommt ein Pferd in die Bar, übersetzt von Anne Birkenhauer. Anne Birkenhauer ist eine der herausragenden Übersetzerinnen aus dem Hebräischen, ist dafür mehrfach ausgezeichnet worden. Sie hat den Johann-Heinrich-Voss-Preis der Deutschen Akademie für Sprache und Dichtung erhalten. Sie hat den Celan-Preis des Deutschen Literaturfonds erhalten und den Deutsch-Hebräischen Übersetzerpreis. Die beiden letzten übrigens nicht ganz ohne Zusammenhang mit dem letzten Buch von David Grossman, kommt ein Pferd in die Bar. Und nun hat sie auch dieses neue Buch übersetzt. Und wir hören nun den Anfang dieses neuen Romans, was Nina wusste, vorgetragen von der Schauspielerin Johanna Polley.
Raphael war 15, als seine Mutter starb und ihn von ihrem Leiden erlöste. Es regnete. Auf dem kleinen Friedhof drängten sich die Kibbuz-Mitglieder unter Schirmen. Tuvia, Raphaels Vater, weinte hemmungslos. Jahrelang hatte er seine Frau hingebungsvoll gepflegt. Jetzt wirkte er verloren und verwaist. Raphael in kurzen Hosen stand abseits, Kopf und Augen von einer Kapuze verdeckt, damit man nicht sah, dass er nicht weinte. Er dachte, jetzt wo sie tot ist, sieht sie alles, was ich über sie gedacht habe. Das war im Winter 1962. Ein Jahr später begegnete sein Vater Vera Nowak, die aus Jugoslawien ins Land gekommen war, und sie zogen zusammen. Vera war mit ihrer einzigen Tochter Nina nach Israel eingewandert. Die war 17, hochgewachsen, hatte helles Haar und ihr langes, bleiches Gesicht war sehr schön, aber beinahe ausdruckslos. Raphaels Klassenkameraden nannten sie Sphinx. Sie liefen heimlich hinter ihr her, machten ihren Gang nach, wie sie die Arme um sich schlang, und imitierten ihren hohlen Blick. Einmal erwischte sie zwei Jungs dabei und schlug sie kurzerhand zusammen. Solche Prügel hatte man im Kibbuz bis dahin noch nicht gesehen. Kaum zu glauben, welche Kraft und Wildheit in diesen dünnen Armen und Beinen steckte. Erste Gerüchte machten die Runde. Man erzählte, als ihre Mutter politische Gefangene im Gulag und Nina noch ein kleines Mädchen war, habe sie auf der Straße gelebt. Man sagte, auf der Straße, und rollte dabei vielsagend die Augen. Man erzählte auch, sie habe sich in Belgrad einer Bande Straßenkinder angeschlossen, die andere Kinder entführten und Lösegeld erpressten. Leute reden. Doch weder die Geschichte von der Schlägerei noch andere Ereignisse und Gerüchte drangen durch den Nebel, in dem Raphael nach dem Tod seiner Mutter lebte. Monatelang befand er sich in einem Zustand der Selbstbetäubung. Zweimal täglich, morgens und abends, schluckte er eine starke Schlaftablette aus dem Arzneischrank seiner Mutter. Er nahm Nina noch nicht mal wahr, wenn sie ihm im Kibbuz hier und da über den Weg lief. Eines Abends, Ein knappes Jahr nach dem Tod seiner Mutter, als er die Abkürzung durch die Avocado-Plantage zur Turnhalle nahm, kam sie ihm entgegen. Den Kopf gesenkt, die Arme um sich geschlungen, als sei alles um sie herum kalt. Raphael blieb stehen. Etwas in ihm spannte sich plötzlich, er wusste nicht warum. Nina, ganz in sich versunken, bemerkte ihn nicht. Er sah ihre Bewegungen. Der erste Eindruck war ihre stille, sparsame Art, sich zu bewegen. Die hohe Stirn, rein und ein schlichtes, blaues Kleid aus dünnem Stoff, das auf halber Höhe um ihre Schenkel flatterte. Ich sehe noch sein Gesicht, als er das erzählte. Erst als sie schon ziemlich nah war, bemerkte Raphael, dass sie weinte. Ein stilles, ersticktes Weinen. Und dann sah auch sie ihn, blieb stehen und machte einen Katzenbuckel. Für einige Sekunden verfingen sich ihre Blicke ineinander. Und man kann sagen, leider unentwirrbar für immer. Der Himmel, die Erde, die Bäume, hatte mir Raphael erzählt. Keine Ahnung, es war, als ob die Natur die Besinnung verlor. Nina kam als Erste wieder zu sich. Sie schnaubte wütend und ging sofort auf Abstand. Er konnte gerade noch einen Blick auf ihr Gesicht werfen, von dem sich im nächsten Moment jeder Ausdruck abschälte, und etwas in ihm brandete zu ihr hin. Er streckte die Hand nach ihr. Ich sehe ihn förmlich vor mir, wie er dasteht mit der Hand. Und so ist er geblieben, die Hand ausgestreckt. 45 Jahre schon. Aber damals in der Plantage sprang er auf und ohne nachzudenken und noch bevor er zögern oder sich in sich selbst verheddern konnte, rannte er hinter ihr her, um ihr zu sagen, was er in diesem Augenblick verstanden hatte. Alles in ihm war zum Leben erwacht. Ich hatte ihn darum gebeten, mir das zu erklären. Er erzählte, er sei ganz durcheinander gekommen, habe nur etwas davon gemurmelt, wie viel in den Jahren der Krankheit seiner Mutter in ihm eingeschlafen war und mehr noch nach ihrem Tod. Aber in diesem Moment sei alles plötzlich ganz akut gewesen, schicksalentscheidend. Und er habe nicht daran gezweifelt, dass sie ihn sofort erhören würde. Nina hatte seine Schritte gehört, wie er ihr nachrannte, war stehen geblieben, hatte sich umgedreht und ihn langsam gemustert. »Was willst du?« bellte sie ihm ins Gesicht. Er schreckte zurück, er bebte angesichts ihrer Schönheit und vielleicht auch angesichts ihrer Grobheit und ja, ich fürchte, gerade angesichts dieser Mischung von Schönheit und Grobheit. Das hat er bis heute, diese Schwäche für Frauen mit ein klein bisschen männlicher Aggression oder sogar Grobheit, quasi als Gewürz. Nina hatte die Hände in die Hüften gestemmt, das harte Mädchen von der Straße kam durch, das wilde Tier. Ihre Nasenlöcher weiteten sich, sie roch ihn. Raphael sah das Pochen einer feinen, bläulichen Ader an ihrem Hals. Und plötzlich taten ihm die Lippen weh. So hat es mir erzählt, sie brannten richtig vor Durst. Okay, ich hab's kapiert, dachte ich, die Details kannst du mir ersparen. Auf Ninas Wange glitzerten noch Tränen, aber ihre Augen waren kalt gewesen, fast wie die einer Schlange. »Geh nach Hause, Jüngelchen«, hatte sie gesagt. Doch er schüttelte den Kopf. »Nein, nein.« Und sie näherte ihre Stirn langsam seinem Kopf, schob sie etwas vor, etwas zurück, als suche sie einen ganz bestimmten Punkt, und er schloss die Augen und sie stieß ihn mit der Stirn und er flog hintenüber in die Kuhle eines Avocadobaums. »Avocado, Sorte Ettinger«, präzisierte er, als er das erzählte, damit ich ja nicht vergaß, dass jedes, aber auch jedes Detail in dieser Szene wichtig war. Denn so erschafft man Mythen. Verstört hockte er in der Kuhle, betastete die Beule, die sich auf seiner Stirn bildete, und stand auf. Ihm schwindelte. Seit seine Mutter gestorben war, hatte Raphael keinen Menschen mehr berührt. Und kein Mensch hatte ihn berührt, außer bei Prügeleien. Aber das hier war etwas anderes, das spürte er. Sie war gekommen, um ihm endlich den Schädel zu öffnen und ihn aus dieser Folter zu befreien. Und in der Blindheit seines Schmerzes schrie er ihr entgegen, was er in dem Moment, als er sie sah, gespürt hatte. Doch er erschrak, als die Worte leer und grob aus ihm herauskamen. Wörter wie Jungs sie verwenden, hat er mir erzählt. Lass dich halt ficken, etwas in der Art. So ganz anders als der reine und klare Gedanke, den er gehabt hatte. Aber vielleicht 2,5 Sekunden habe ich auf ihrem Gesicht gesehen, dass sie mich trotz dieser Grobheit, dass sie mich trotzdem verstanden hat. Vielleicht ist es ja wirklich so gewesen, was weiß ich. Warum soll ich ihr das nicht zugestehen? Warum nicht glauben, dass ein junges Mädchen in Jugoslawien geboren und, wie sich später herausstellte, tatsächlich einige Jahre lang ausgesetzt und sich selbst überlassen, ohne Vater und Mutter, dass so ein Mädchen trotz seiner Startbedingungen und vielleicht gerade deshalb in einem Augenblick der Gnade in einen Knaben aus dem Kibbuz hineinschauen konnte. Einen in sich gekehrten Knaben, so stelle ich ihn mir vor, mit seinen 15 Jahren, einsam, voller Geheimnisse, voller verwickelter Berechnungen und großer Gesten, von denen niemand auf der Welt etwas wusste. Ein trauriger, düsterer Knabe, aber schön, zum Heulen schön. Das war Raphael, mein Vater. Es gibt einen bekannten Film, ich erinnere mich gerade nicht, wie er heißt. Da kehrt der Held in die Vergangenheit zurück, um dort etwas zu korrigieren, um einen Weltkrieg zu verhindern oder so. Was gäbe ich darum, in die Vergangenheit zurückzukehren, nur um zu verhindern, dass diese beiden sich dort begegnen?
Ja, vielen Dank, Johanna Polley, für diese Lesung. David, we listened to the very beginning of your novel, the scene in the orchard, in the avocado orchard, and we have in this scene your Vera. We have her husband. We have Nina. We have the storyteller. And the storyteller is a female voice. She's one of the youngest characters in the novel. She's the granddaughter. And she has something to do not with novels, but with film. She has a camera with her when they travel later in your novel to this prison island, Goli Otok, where Vera was imprisoned in the early 50s, in the 50s. And this is a very interesting choice to create a storyteller who sees the main character from a perspective of someone who is many years younger. So we have here 3 generations. Vera, you mentioned her, this old person, her daughter, Nina, and the daughter of Nina is this young person, Gili. And in the end of this scene, we listen to her, and she says, "Oh, I would have liked to prevent my parents to come together." This is a very strange beginning, isn't it?
Well, it's very understandable. If you don't like yourself, if you don't like your life, then you hate your parents and made you. This more or less is the situation of young Gili, and she has been abandoned by her mother, Nina. And by the way, Nina has been abandoned by her mother, Vera. So it's a chain of misery and insult, tragedy. And they take off to this island, the Goli Otok island, in front of the seashore, the coast of Croatia, where I myself tried 3 times to climb on this little island. Twice I succeeded. One, it was so rainy that it was impossible to sail into this island. No one was willing to take me there. But Gili takes her mother and her grandmother and her father, Raphael, to this island. And she wants to document them. And actually, the one who really wants to document this trip is Nina, because she is in a process of losing her memory. She's not that old. I think she's 62, 63. But she starts to lose her memory. and she knows that in the near future she will not remember many things and maybe not remember herself or her story or her family. And she wants that her mother and her grandmother will speak to Nina of the future, will remind her the things that she might forget. It's a strange experiment that she does, but it has a logic of its own. She doesn't want to lose all her identity, and she wishes that when she is in the process of losing, there will be some documents to remind her who she was.
Now, in crime stories, you have the motive that somebody returns to the place where he committed the crime. Here in your novel, it's about victims. It's about the returning of the victims to the place where they were imprisoned or even tortured. And this travel to East Europe is both. It's a travel in space and time, because they want to travel back to this island where years before Vera was imprisoned. And this is a kind of, isn't it a kind of therapeutical idea, or is it a curiosity plot to know more, to learn what happened, or both?
I think it's both. There is to know the story, and there is a need to go through the therapeutic process. And there is also recognition of the power of the storytelling, of the need to retell every story anew, in new words, new emphases. I'm fascinated by the situation of stories. I think in every one of my books there is someone who is telling a story to another significant human being, or sometimes it's a human being that is not significant, but the fact that he or she listened to this story makes them significant and makes it relevant to them. And I thought of it that every one of us, we have our personal legislative stories. You know, the stories of how we were when we were poor, about our family, about how we were misunderstood or overlooked by our parents, how we were ill-treated by our siblings or friends. Usually a lot of insult is involved in these legislative stories. And over the years, we learn how to tell these stories in a growingly better and better and better way. We become really super actors in presenting our story. But the problem is that maybe at a certain point we might look at ourselves and ask, are we really telling our story, or we just declamate and quote the last time we told this story? Maybe we start to realize that there is not enough air and vitality in our official formal story, and that over the years, because we believed so much in this story, we became the prisoners, the captives, the victims of our legislative system. And of course, it applies to individuals, and even more so to society, to nations, to countries. Every nation needs a kind of a legislative myth to explain all kinds of things that in order to become this state, the wars that you had to be involved at, the places that she behaved in an ideal way, where the enemy behaved in a demonic way. And this is important, these official legislative myths. As I said, every nation needs them, but maybe it's also very useful at a certain point to look back into these stories and to ask ourselves, are we really there? Are we really stuck there? in this faraway history, maybe we can tell the story in somewhat a little different way. Maybe we can set ourselves free from the grasp, sorry, of this story that makes us, again, these prisoners. Personally, I can tell you that whenever I told a very private story in new words, when I saw the text of reality from a somewhat different point of view, things have changed for me. I suddenly understood things that I was unable to understand before, when I was trapped in the old story. Suddenly, for example, it's possible to understand that also Mama had a Mama. You know, also Mama has her justifications because she was raised in a certain way and imprisoned in a certain way. Also, Papa has the right for psychology. Not only us have the right for psychology, they also have their psychology and their circumstances and their failure and fears and frustrations. All of this can be achieved if you tell the old stories in a new way and in a way that will be attentive to the story, to the nuances of it. If you recreate it, rewrite it almost every time anew. And this story, what Nina knew, is maybe the utmost adventure because there are these three women and the man, Raphael. And the three women, each of them is trapped in the tragic story of the family, trapped in the sense that they cannot really move towards each other freely. There is always this obstacle. And the fact that they came back to Goliath, or to the place where everything started to be distorted, where the primal sin was created, so to say, the sin of abandoning Nina by her mother, because her mother wanted to remain loyal to her dead husband, Milos. And for that, she had to abandon her daughter. To go back there to expose Nina and Gili and Vera to the place where all their life has been devastated and distorted, and there to allow them to start to tell their story anew and to listen to the story anew. And I think for me, this was maybe the strongest energy of writing this book. The understanding that you are not doomed to be the passive, helpless victim of your own story.
So this means that on the one hand, storytelling is a kind of resistance to what happened. And on the other hand, there is a deep element of mistrust in your novel. I mean, this young woman, Gili, and her mother are, in a certain sense, victims of a victim. And they have a huge mistrust in the stories of Vera, of the first victim. And they want to find out, what did she omit? What didn't she tell us? And is there a hidden part of the family story? So I'm curious to know, how did you manage to get these characters, on the one hand, together? They travel together, and they have, in a certain sense, the same interest to go back to this island, the first place of the story, in a certain sense. And on the other hand, they do mistrust themselves, seen from the point of view of the stories everybody does tell. So you have this ongoing revision of the stories. You say you can be trapped in a story. And I think this is a novel of about characters who are trapped in stories and try to find a way out.
Yeah, it's a good definition. You have to remember that the three women are survivors, and harsh survivors, and extreme survivors. and they do not trust each other or any other very easily, except one person. They trust Raphael. All the three women trust Raphael, who is a very soft man, and a man who can contain all the extremities of these three women. And he, in a very natural, comfortable way almost, he made Vera a mother, and he taught Nina what love can be and devotion can be. And he is the softest and the most devoted father to Gili. So he is in a way a kind of redemption to the wounds that they all suffer from. He is the marinade where all the three of them can marinate their wounds and feel a little redempted and cured. And of course, people who are survivors will very, very carefully give trust in other people, even when these people are their mother or grandmother. And one of the challenges of writing this story was to convince the reader that such a process is possible, that these three women can, because of the circumstances, because of some changing the point of view, suddenly not only that they were able to tell the real story, but they were eager to tell the real story. And there is the moment when Nina understands the terrible injustice that was done to her by her mother, a feeling that she felt all her life. All her life she felt that something terrible has happened between her mother and herself, but she is not aware of the details of it, and everybody tries to hide it from her. And then there is a moment in the middle of the storm on Goli Otok, on the island, in the middle of the night, when Nina runs away from the barrack where they find shelter from the rain. Mm-hmm. And she runs and she walks like a crazy person on the island that she knows the geography of more than she knew any geography she lived in her real life. And suddenly she realized what she was a victim to. But unexpectedly, instead of becoming vengeful and hateful, she feels such relief because she knew all her life, she knew it. And people hid it from her. And now it's true, and she regained her sanity and her identity even. And when she comes home to the barrack, and they are drying her up with towels from the rain, suddenly for the first time in her life, maybe she feels at her place, and she feels accepted and enveloped by them. And it's all very delicate and tender and complicated moves of emotionality. And I must tell you, Lothar, it was such a pleasure trying to follow these very tender changes in the development of the relationship with the three women.
Yeah, I can imagine that, and I have a question concerning the form of your storytelling. We heard in this beginning of the novel, in the very first pages, the Gili character mentions this effect of time machine in a film. She remembers a time machine film. And of course, the film is very famous for stories like this. All of a sudden you are in the future or back in another century or something like that. But literature as well is a time machine. And you use the form of the novel as a time machine, in this novel especially. It's not always very easy to know where are we now seen from the point of the historical calendar. Are we in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? I mean, now. So you have this link between these various layers of the past, and these layers of the past are within the characters and they are without them, and out of them. And I would like to know, why did you choose to be your main storyteller, this Gili? Why did you make her a director, somebody who's with a camera? I think we couldn't tell the story of the end of the novel where the camera is broken and why the camera is broken. But the camera has to be broken in order to make the beginning of writing possible. There is a shift from camera to writing in this novel. And I think it's the shift from cinema to your profession, writing a novel. Or are you the man with a camera?
Yeah, a writer is always a man with a camera and a pen. But I think that it was a choice between the past and the future. The past with all its heaviness and tragedy and terrible hurt and terrible act of victimizing, and the future that, as it's said in the last line of the book, there will be a little daughter to Gili. There will be a window opened to the future after years that they have had to breathe suffocating air. I wanted Gili to carry a camera because I like to see another way of documenting, through the eyes, visual documenting. But also the camera exposes the people that it shoots. And Gili notices, for example, that her grandmother is much more warm and kind to Nina, who is in the camera, who is filmed by the camera. And it's much more problematic for her, for Vera, to be warm and paternal to the real Nina. I thought you were going to ask me, why did I choose Gili as a storyteller or a camera teller? And it's more easy to answer. I had to choose between the three women, who will be the storyteller. Vera, it was very tempting, but because of the singularity of her language, I was afraid too much attention would be drawn to the language, and maybe even it will feel like a caricature of her, which I will never do, of course. And then there was Nina. She was a natural choice, but Nina, all her life, because of what happened to her when she was 6.5, when she was abandoned by her mother, she lived in parallel to her life. She lived almost the life she could have had. And all her life is a kind of whistling near the right tune, never the real right tune. And she's like enveloped with a bubble that separates her from reality and isolates her from reality. So I felt she cannot tell this story. And then there was Gili. And I liked her because there is a little more freedom about Gili than the other two women. After all, she is a little more remote from the wound that Vera caused Nina, even though she had her own wound because she was abandoned. But Gili, she's younger, she's more flexible, she has humor, which the other two lacks, I feel. Vera does not have sense of humor because I think that fanatic people rarely have sense of humor. She had irony, she had sarcasm, even cynicism from time to time, more rarely, but not humor. And Gili had humor. And maybe the humor is what allowed her to survive what she had to come through. Because when you laugh, you also breathe from time to time.
Well, this was a very convincing answer. While reading your novels, especially this one, I have the impression you're a specialist in family novels. And this is a very interesting genre. We have here in Germany this strong tradition from Thomas Mann, the decline of a family due to either economical reasons or inner weakness or something like that. We have in the Anglo-Saxon family novel these family sagas deeply rooted in region or even in the nation, and even part of the history of the nation in these family sagas. In your novels you have families on the one hand, on the other hand there is recent history. And I would say the families in your novels are in a certain sense part of the battlegrounds of history. Not in the sense that families are battleground. This is another form of family novel, that families are enemies, or that every member of a family is the enemy of the other. This is another type of novel. I mean battleground in another sense, that the inner world of your characters in your stories, and you have always characters surrounded by families with their stories. This inner world of the families and of the singular person, the individuals, is filled with the stories of the battlegrounds of history. In this case, the political subject is the division between Tito Yugoslavia and the Stalinist Soviet Union in the early 50s. This is part of the real history behind the novel. Yes. And the battleground is the set of the families, the set of stories told within the family about these events. And I would like to learn a little bit more about this is a very fundamental choice in your whole work, to define families as kind of narrative perpetuum mobile. You have the families in, for example, To the End of the Land. In German it's called Eine Frau flieht vor einer Nachricht. And I would like to know, when did you discover the narrative potential of the family for you as a writer of novels? As a young man, I suppose.
I think it started much before I recognized myself as a writer. It started when I recognized myself as the son of these two people, my parents, the brother of my brother, the grandchild of some grandfathers and mothers. And, you know, in every family almost, and at every generation, there is one child who listens to the stories of the elderly people. All the other children are totally not interested, and they are bored to death when grandpa starts to tell again about his story. And there is one child who is intrigued and understands that it tells him something important about himself and about his background and about why is he like that and why is he not like this. I think I was this child. By the way, until a very old age, whenever I felt that one of the members of my family gets really old, I went and I documented his life. I hope they are not afraid of me when they see me next time, because usually it was when they were very, very old. But I am fascinated by family stories. I am fascinated by families. It's such a throbbing reality, the distance, the right distance between parents and children, the feeling it's always either too close or too remote. The fact that members of the family are made of the material, physical actual materials of the father and the mother. And this creates a very unique relationship and sensitivity. I have now granddaughters, young, one is 8, one is 6, and I thought that the human species is the only species on Earth that has contact with his grandchildren. And it's not taken for granted. Yes, you know, a fox does not necessarily recognize his granddaughter or grandson. He might even eat them or fight them. And the sensitivity of the family members to the behavior of others that radiates to them something that is either too familiar or alienated. Everything that is being done in the context of the family carries more significance than an encounter between just people or friends that do not have this contact. And I always like to think that the most delicate and meaningful events in the history of mankind, they have not occurred in battlefields or in parliaments, corridors, or palaces, but rather in kitchens and in bedrooms and in homes of children. All those dramas of the children, all the things that the child discovers about his place in the family, in the world. We are so exposed when it comes to a family. And you know, we are here, we are in Israel, and our book of books, the Bible, the Tanakh, is maybe the most extreme and fascinating story about families, especially the book of Genesis. The first family where Cain murdered Abel, and Joseph and his brothers, and Joseph and his father, and all those Jacob and Esau. So many stories of jealousy and revenge. And I think maybe because we are educated by the Bible, even when we are not secular, from a very young age, sharpened our Israeli writers, our sensitivity towards families. And on top of that, I think Jews are familial people. Family is very, very important, and very, very central. And sometimes it's so symbiotic that it can suffocate you. And many other times it's the only place that you really feel secured and protected. So well, maybe from that derives my attraction to write about families.
Thank you. We talked today about your novel, and this novel is about East Europe. The origins of the biography of the main character are in Eastern Europe. We have now these years of change as a motto here in Leipzig, and I would like to ask you, in the last 30 years you traveled, you mentioned it, to Croatia, and you perhaps observed the developments in Eastern Europe from your perspective, which means from the point of view of a writer in Israel. And I would like to know, what do you think about these last 30 years? And for example, did you ever talk with the real Eva about the story of her region after 1989 and 1991?
I spoke a lot about what happened in former Yugoslavia with Eva, sorry. And she was devastated by what happened in the Balkan and what happened between Croatia and Serbia. And for her, it was the example of the horrible nature of mankind, the fact that such brutality was performed. But you know, Lothar, I was looking at the title of this meeting, Years of the Change, And I thought that if this is the last question you asked me, I wanted to talk about the years of not changing anything. Because I live here in Israel, and we are stuck in the situation of the occupation of the Palestinians now for 54 years. And there is not any serious effort to end this situation. And the stagnation is so deep that people start really to believe that it's a kind of divine decree that we are doomed to kill and to be killed, to live on the sword and to die on the sword. There are some peace treaties, surprising and important, between Israel and the Emirates, Israel and Morocco. They are almost theoretical peace because there has never been war between us and them. And it's a kind of a piece of the rich, of people who realize and recognize the economic chances of having peace with this or that country. But unless we do peace with the Palestinians, with our real partner, our real twin in this twin trap, we shall not have the state of mind of peace, of real peace, of being at our home here. Israel will not be a home if the Palestinians do not have a home, and vice versa. We might have a place that is like home, and it has some elements of a home, but it's more of a forest than of a real home with a protection feeling of a home, of belonging, of relevance, of being able to decode the code. And it's really, it breaks my heart to think that we are still trapped in this situation where just 2 nights ago, something like 45 missiles were shot from Gaza towards Israel, and Israel retaliated. And there was a clash of hooligan groups, Israelis and Palestinians, near the old city of Jerusalem, and people were wounded. And the violence goes on and on and on as if we are doomed to it. Now, there is a kind of a distorted logic that if somebody shoots missiles at you, you hit him back. But the main question should be, how can it be that we are trapped in this bubble of reality that makes this distorted logic possible and viable? And when it comes to that, I hear no answer, not from my leaders, not from Mr. Netanyahu, not from Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinians, as if a spell was cast on these two ambitious, energetic, creative people, and they are unable to do anything. And since we are speaking now, and you are in Leipzig, in Europe, I must say that Europe neglects its duty, even I would say, to try to bring these two reluctant opponents, rivals, the Israelis and the Palestinians, and to enable a dialogue with them. A dialogue might start to change things, might start to be a new way to tell our tragic story, our hermetic story. Otherwise, there will be no change, but it's an illusion because it's never no change. There is a slow or fast deterioration of so many important elements of our life here, and first and foremost our democracy. Because if you occupy another people for 54 years, you cannot really call yourself a democracy. This is an apartheid. It's a beginning of, it's not only the beginning of apartheid, it aggravates more and more. We desperately need to cure ourselves from this malady.
So, to sum this up, you would say you have an urgent need for years of change.
Yes,
in your political sphere. Of course, we have these political discussions here. You mentioned the politics of the European Union towards Israel. There is an ongoing debate on the relationship between politics in your country and commenting these politics and the issue of anti-Semitism. Here in Germany, you mentioned, for example, the discussion about apartheid and so on. So it's very difficult to to go into a real discussion on this field, isn't it?
It's complicated, it's delicate, it should be done. Of course, I will fight with every way I can anti-Semite people and anti-Semite opinions, and it's very easily traced. And there must be a separation between legitimate criticism on Israel and anti-Semitism that should not be tolerated at all, and should be fought with all determination and decisiveness. But still there is a room to a friendly criticism and liberating Israel from the deadlock that it finds itself in.
So thank you very much, David Grossman, for the talk about your novel. And thank you very much for the commentaries and your explanations. And I wish you very much the years of change you're longing for. I hope we see us the next time as real physical beings, wherever it may be.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lothar. Always such a pleasure to have you as a reader.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, das war unsere Veranstaltung mit David Grossman. Ich hoffe, Sie haben alles verstehen können. Sie können das Buch natürlich selber nochmal nachlesen. Ich halte es nochmal Ihnen hier in die Kamera. David Grossman, was Nina wusste, es ist im Hansa Verlag erschienen und leicht zu erwerben. Und jetzt wünsche ich Ihnen allen, wo immer auch Sie sein mögen, noch einen angenehmen Abend. Ich bedanke mich nochmal bei der Technik und bei der einladenden Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung und bei der Schauspielerin Johanna Poller, die für uns gelesen hat. Guten Abend.